Good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Hart Bennett, and today I'm going to read chapter 36 from the third leg of the 5,000-mile journey that the seven sisters take from London to Salt Lake City. And it's entitled Seven Sisters, The Trek, chapter 36. Lavinia was awakened by a nudge to her shoulder. She opened her eyes, despairing when she remembered her predicament. She could hear chanting and intermittent laughing, whooping and chirping outside her tent. She struggled to get in a sitting position so she could see who was in the tent with her. It was the woman in the white buckskin robe who had inspected her earlier in the afternoon. She had a tray of several dishes on it, which she set down next to Lavinia. She spoke a few words, but Lavinia had no idea what she was saying. She dipped a small cloth into a bowl of water and began to wash Lavinia's face, which had been covered with dust and mixed with tears. The water felt cool and refreshing. Lavinia begged, "Water? Drink?" The woman didn't say anything, but held up a clay cup of water from the tray and looked at her as if to say, "Is this what you want?" Lavinia replied eagerly, "Yes, yes," and bobbed her head up and down. The woman put the cup to her lips. Lavinia drank eagerly. When the water was gone, the woman picked up a bowl of black, stew-like substance and began to spoon it into Lavinia's mouth. It tasted similar to the buffalo roast Caroline had fixed a few weeks before, but with different seasonings. It was tasty, hearty, and hot, and she was ravenous. As she was being fed the meat, she began to get a better look at the woman in front of her. She was a little different from the other Indian women. She had what appeared to be dirt on her face. She was the one who needed her face washed. Upon finishing her feeding chores, the woman took a crude bone comb off the tray and proceeded to part Lavinia's hair in the middle, from her forehead down to the nape of her neck. "What are you doing? Are you getting me ready for my husband?" The woman was stone-faced. "Please, I'm begging you to let me go. I can't be married to an Indian. I can't live in the out-of-doors the rest of my life. I can't learn to speak your language." Then she raised her voice in despair. "I'm not intended to live this way." The woman gave Lavinia a forceful hit with the heel of her hand to the side of her head, which wasn't meant to feel good, and she yelled something Lavinia took to mean, "Shut your mouth." Lavinia began to cry. The woman hit her again and yelled the same thing. She realized she needed to keep quiet, or this woman was going to knock her out completely. The woman continued her project of combing Lavinia's straggly bangs in with the rest of her hair and twirling 3 strands into a braid down each side of her head. The woman then picked up the tray and walked to the tent door. As she opened it and stepped out, Lavinia could see that it was dark outside. She had slept quite a while. She caught a glimpse of the central fire and several men, including her captors, dancing around it while others sat on the sidelines chanting. Some were passing bottles around, taking drinks, and yelling things at the moon. Lavinia's mind started to spin. If it's dark, it's night. And if it's night, it's probably my wedding night. And I have just been prepared to receive my husband. She took a deep breath and struggled to loosen her bands again, only to feel the pain of her torn wrists. In a few seconds, she heard a little noise outside her tent door, and it immediately became rigid. Her heart was beating out of her chest. She ducked her head and closed her eyes. She couldn't bear to look at her captor. She heard the tent flap open. Someone stepped in. She finally got the courage to peek through her squinting eyes, and there again was the favored tribeswoman. This time, the woman simply took a spot across the tent from Lavinia, sat down with her knees bent, and crossed her legs at the ankles. Lavinia wasn't sure what was going to happen next. The woman sat there. The woman sat in what looked like a stupor until her head fell on her chest. Even though she was in the tent with her, Lavinia felt terribly alone. Then she realized she wasn't alone. She could pray to Heavenly Father for help. She had been so obsessed with her capture that she hadn't even thought to turn to him. Now the words of a familiar hymn started flowing through her head. She thought that if she sang it softly, no one would hear her because of the noisy celebration outside the tent. She needed this comfort. "I need thee every hour, most gracious Lord. No tender voice like thine can peace afford. Do you hear something? Said Caroline, pulling on Hurricane's sleeve. They both stopped. How can you hear anything over all that chanting? He said. It's probably just the wind whistling through the trees. This made Caroline doubt herself. She shook it off as they continued creeping toward the edge of the village. I need thee every hour, stay thou nearby. Temptations lose their power when thou art nigh. Lavinia was starting to feel peaceful and calm as she sang. She felt the need to sing a little louder on the plaintive chorus. I swear I can hear someone singing above the din, Caroline voiced again. Let's hold still and listen for a minute. All right, if you heard it twice, it must be something. Lavinia sang the next verse with all the feeling and fervor she could emote. I need thee every hour, in joy and pain. Come quickly and abide, or life is vain. Did you hear that? Come quickly and abide. That's Lavinia, and she's singing. I heard it, admitted Hurricane. Now we just need to figure out which teepee she's in. They grew hopeful as they moved to the closest tents and listened again. The song is coming from one of those far tents, Hurricane said, pointing. Let's go one at a time. Crouch low when you run between the open spaces so no one in the camp will see you. Hurricane crept past the first two tents and stopped to listen again. It's this one, he mouthed as he pointed. Then he waved her to join him. While he waited for her to join him, he crept forward and peeked around the tent to see what the Indians were doing. They seemed to be having a grand time, getting drunk, dancing, and firing up the large Indian with anticipation before he claimed his bride. Hurricane then moved to the back of the selected teepee and poked a tiny tip of his knife into the covering to cut a little hole. He looked inside and saw a woman with long braids sitting in Indian dress tied up to a post. Her eyes were looking upward. Hurricane had to look twice, but he knew it had to be Lavinia because she was singing so beautifully and in English. He continued looking around the outside of the tent, only to discover the Indian woman sitting opposite Lavinia, asleep with her chin on her chest. He let Caroline take a look. That's her, she whispered, joyfully, giving Hurricane a quick hug. Hurricane determined he could cut a slit in the tent, and the Indian woman wouldn't hear it because of the celebration outside. Lavinia sang the last lines of the chorus prayerfully and beautiful. I need thee, oh, I need thee, every hour I need thee. Oh, bless me now, my Savior, I come to thee. By the time she completed the song, Hurricane had finished cutting the slit in the teepee. He waited to see if the woman would stir when the singing stopped, but she didn't. You stay here, he said to Caroline. He slid through the slit. The tent was quite large, and the fire in the center had died down and was casting eerie shadows on the wall with each flicker. He crept toward Lavinia and then froze when he saw the Indian woman stir. Lavinia had her head bowed. Her lips were mouthing what he assumed was a prayer. He suddenly caught a glimpse of some movement to his left and quickly turned his head, only to see that Caroline had followed him into the tent. He didn't have time to scold her for not following his instructions. He was just relieved that it was Caroline and not an Indian. He put his finger to his lips and motioned for him to join him. They moved slowly around the perimeter of the interior of the tent, staying in the shadows. When Hurricane got close enough, he crept up behind Lavinia and slipped his hand over her mouth so she wouldn't make any noise. He held on tightly as he whispered in her ear, Don't make a sound. It's Hurricane and Caroline. Lavinia went from panic to sheer relief as she contemplated her liberation. Tears flowed and a lump came to her throat. Hurricane let go of her mouth and cut the rawhide bindings as Caroline gave her a much-needed hug. When they looked up from their silent reunion, however, there stood the Indian woman a few paces in front of them. They all froze. Would she raise the alarm? She stepped toward them into the light. Go quickly, she said. They were astonished. You speak English? Gasped Lavinia. Yes, don't delay. My husband will be here any minute to take you to his marriage bed. Lavinia was flabbergasted. The large Indian was already married? Her mind clicked back to when the favored woman was washing her face. She knew there was something about her appearance that didn't ring true. She had evidently covered her lighter skin with dirt to make it look darker. She wasn't an Indian at all, but a white woman who had been captured just like she had been. "Come with us," Lavinia begged. "We'll take you to safety." No, I've got 2 sons. You go." "But will you get into trouble?" "I'll get beaten, but it won't be the first time. Please go. I don't want you to suffer the life I have suffered." "Do you want us to communicate with anyone?" "When I was being kidnapped, my husband was shot with several arrows, so I'm not sure if he survived. If he did, his name is Francis Grant. He was planning to settle in Vernal by his Uncle Ned. Tell him his wife Jenny is alive and has 2 sons by the son of one of the Arapaho chiefs. Tell him I have never stopped loving him, but hope he has found happiness with someone else. I stay where I am for the sake of my sons." Lavinia lunged forward and gave her a grateful hug. "You are a true saint, Sister Grant. God bless you." Caroline hugged and thanked her also. Then the 3 made their way out the opening, while their saving angel went back to her place to sit and await the wrath of her husband. On the outside of the tent, Hurricane whispered to Caroline and Lavinia, "Go and wait for me by the horses. I've got one more thing to do." The girls didn't argue, but moved quickly and quietly up the hill. Thankfully, the moon was almost full, and they could see enough to recognize trees and rocks. Reaching the top, they looked back at the village. They could see silhouettes moving around the huge campfire. Caroline looked hard to see if she could see Hurricane following them up the hill, but she couldn't. Hurricane had moved around the outside of the teepees to the place where the Indian ponies were grazing. He looked for any guards who might be there, but they must have been participating with the other men at the celebration. He stealthily crept to the ponies, which didn't seem to mind that someone was crawling around among them. He cut the rawhide strap that was tethering each of their front legs together and gave them a slap on their rumps to encourage them to run away to better grazing pastures. When his work was done, he cautiously ran back up the hill to the sisters and the horses. "What took you so long?" Caroline wondered out loud. "I just felt in a freedom-giving mood tonight, Sister Cleverly," he said, smiling. "We freed Lavinia from the Indians, and I freed the Indians from their horses." Thank you, Lavinia said, giving Hurricane a grateful hug. "I will never forget this." "We'd better make some tracks, sisters. You 2 ride together and follow me." "Let me borrow your knife first, Brother Clark," said Lavinia. Caroline and Hurricane wondered what she wanted with the knife. She soon answered their questions as she cut up the side seams of her dress several inches. "Now I can straddle the horse better." "That's reasonable, Sister Tippet," said Hurricane. "Now let's go find the Dixie train." After the 3 rode for many miles, the light of day started to glow in the east. They were exhausted. They pulled up and stopped at a river so they could rest and their horses could drink and graze for a few minutes. "Do you think they will follow us?" asked Lavinia, looking back in the direction they had come. "It's hard to tell," said Hurricane. "It depends on how soon they discover you are gone, how drunk they are, and how far away their horses have run." "How do you feel, Lavinia?" asked Caroline. "Relieved for the time being. I've never had such a horrifying experience in my life. I could kiss both your feet for coming after me. Thank you, she said again. "It was lucky Caroline found your hat, and we acted quickly," said Hurricane. Lavinia smiled unwittingly. Then when she realized Caroline was wearing her hat. "Oh, that is my hat, isn't it? It looks good on you." Caroline laughed. "Do you want it back?" "No, please wear it until we get back to the train." Then she got serious again. "I can't tell you 2 how grateful I am you came after me. I thought my fate was sealed, and I had to spend the rest of my life away from civilization, wandering the plains, married to an Indian." "Well," teased Caroline, "I do like your wedding dress." Lavinia laughed. "It is quite beautiful, isn't it? At least I'll have some proof of my unbelievable story." "We want to thank you for singing that song, Sister Triplet," said Hurricane. "Otherwise, we would have had to look in every tent to find you, increasing our chances of being discovered. Luckily, your voice carried above the din of the camp and led us straight to you." "I was singing a prayer, and my prayer was answered. I am so grateful to Heavenly Father," said Lavinia, starting to choke up again. Caroline put her arms around her and patted her back lovingly. "Let's get going, sisters," urged Hurricane. "We're almost back to the wagon trail, and we want to catch up to our company before they wake up." They mounted their horses and crossed the river at a shallow spot. They rode a mile or so more before they spotted some horses and riders coming toward them at a fast gallop. "Hold up, Caroline, we've got company." Hurricane pulled his shotgun out of his scabbard on the side of his saddle, and Caroline drew the revolver out of her pocket. "Stay behind me," he directed. As the riders got closer, they started whooping and hollering. The three wondered what was going on until they saw some of the Utah boys, led by Captain Andrews and George. The three started to yell and cheer along with them. When they got off their horses, a happy reunion took place as they all congratulated Lavinia on being saved, slapped the back of Hurricane, and shook hands with Caroline. George stayed back until everyone had finished with Lavinia. Then he stepped forward. "I'm so happy to see you," was all he could say as he clasped his hands in both of "I'm so happy to see you," was all he could say as he clasped her hand in both of his. "Thank you," Lavinia choked up, putting her other hand on top of his. They were transfixed on each other for a moment. It was as if they didn't need to say anything more. Then their unspoken thoughts were interrupted. "Do you think you were followed?" Captain Andrews asked Hurricane. "I cut their horses loose last night, but who knows if they have rounded them back up and are on our trail as we speak." "We're camped about 4 miles from here," said Captain Andrews, "so let's get back to the train, where we have more manpower and guns to help us." Back at camp, the Saints were starting to wake up, and many were already working to get prepared for the day. Lavinia was the center of attention when she rode in with her rescuers. Her other sisters led everyone in running to give her a hug. They all expressed their joy that she had escaped without harm. They marveled at her braids and complimented her beautiful Indian dress. They had a myriad of questions. She was overwhelmed by everyone's attention. Captain MacArthur raised his voice to quiet them down. "Brothers and sisters, I know you are all grateful for Sister Triplet's safe return, and you want to know all the particulars of her capture, but we need to put as much distance between us and those Indians as we can today, even though we hope they are still looking for their horses, which Brother Clark so opportunely cut loose last night." Everyone chuckled and agreed as they went to work getting their wagons ready for a quick departure. Hurricane assigned Roland Devereaux to drive Aunt Lucy's wagon, so Caroline didn't have to deal with the burden of driving the oxen after her harrowing rescue experience the night before. As the sisters walked that morning, others joined them so they could hear the full details of the capture and rescue from Lavinia and Caroline's own lips. "I'll admit you two had a very frightening day yesterday," said Eleanor, "but you have no idea of the excitement you missed right here on the Dixie train. Aunt Lucy and I had to deliver Sister Ellen Athey's baby yesterday morning, and then Brother Charles Linney, who joined us from the Synosure, died in the afternoon." "You aren't serious, are you?" ventured Lavinia. "Yes, we are," said Aunt Lucy. "We buried Brother Linney last night. So not only were we worried sick about you and Caroline, but we had the added sorrow and joy a birth and death can bring in the same day." "I don't know whether to cry or laugh," said Caroline. "My problem seems small compared to yours," said Lavinia. "Well, let's not discount that you had the added element of terror and uncertainty throughout your captivity," Lavinia consoled Eleanor. "At least we have the reassurance that Brother Linney's spirit lives on in heaven," said Aunt Lucy, "and he will be with his family again someday." "The Athey baby is the cutest thing you can imagine," Eleanor said. "You'll have to go see her when we get to our camping place tonight." "Sister Triplet," came a voice from behind her. Lavinia turned to see Sir Evelyn walking his horse and trying to catch up to her. She waited for him so they could be alone as they talked. "I'm so glad to see you escape those savage redskins," he began. "Did they violate you?" Lavinia's mouth dropped open and stayed there for a moment. That's a pretty blunt question, Sir Evelyn," she said with raised eyebrows. "Well, you do have on different set of clothes, so naturally I wondered." "Well, yes, but that doesn't mean anything happened to me of that nature." "I'm very relieved to hear that," he said, as he mounted his horse and galloped back to his herding duties. That was a strange exchange, thought Lavinia. George wasn't asking her all these personal questions. He just seemed genuinely happy that she was alive and had been rescued. During the afternoon stop, Lavinia and Caroline changed out of their clothes they wore during the rescue and put on their everyday trekking clothes. After that, there wasn't much more fuss made over them. Lavinia was very glad to get her pioneer identity back and get George's hat back from Caroline. But Caroline hated to take off Hurricane's pants and put on her long, encumbering skirt and pioneer bonnet again. Men have it so simple, she thought. That's the end of chapter 36. Over and out.